Greetings, science fiction and fantasy enthusiasts. Do you read books? Do you watch films? Do you hate deodorant? Then welcome to our podcast. With Ryan Sean O'Reilly, David Wilkinson, and Richard Mell. You're listening to No Deodorant in Outer Space. Now, let's get started.
He awoke and wanted more. The valleys, he thought. What would it be like to trudge among them? Great and greater yet. The dream grew as he became fully conscious. The dream and the yearning. He could almost feel the enveloping presence of the other world, which only government agents and high officials had seen. A clerk like himself, not like them. Welcome back, friends of the podcast. This is Ryan Sean O'Reilly for No Deodorant in Outer Space. I'm welcoming you to our final show of Season 2. Joining me are my longtime co-hosts, David Wilkinson. That's you.
Oh, hi. Do I say something?
Yeah, like every show you say hello.
Oh.
Let the audience
I thought you were introducing me. Yeah, I'm here.
I said it, Dave.
David, is there some kind of action movie playing in your house right now? I hear like a lot of screaming.
Yeah.
Sounds like someone's dying, getting tortured.
It's probably in your neighborhood, dude.
Or is that somebody?
You should probably upgrade.
It's not my neighbor. It's not my neighbor.
And that other sweet, scintillating voice is Richard Mell.
Howdy, everybody.
Rick, how you doing today?
I'm all right. How are you?
Pretty good. On this episode, we're going to be covering Philip K. Dick's collection of short stories called The Preserving Machine and Other Stories.
The whole collection?
Yeah. And
I thought we were just in the one story.
Well, that's not how it was written. It's not what our website.
All the stories?
What's that?
Did you read every story, Rick?
I didn't read every story, no.
Me either.
I read a few. I did enjoy a lot of them.
Okay.
I mean, for
Did
short
you
stories,
read any of them, Wilk?
I just read Become Member for Your Wholesale.
Oh, no wonder you were so ready to podcast. Well, this will be a very limited podcast then.
Okay, well, can I go to bed then?
It'll be like 20 minutes then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why you should pick up the phone when I call you to hop on the podcast instead of just sending angry text messages. Jesus Christ.
I prefer to send angry messages just to you. But you have about 1,000 flyers from the podcast that look like this that show the schedule right here. And if you look at the bottom there, it says
the last one.
The Preserving Machine.
We're doing the last one of the season?
The last one of the season.
I thought we were doing so
God.
close. I thought we were only doing the one short story from this, the Total Recall
I don't know
one.
why you thought that.
Because we had a conversation about that.
In your head we did. Quaid.
Yeah.
So we'll be covering Philip K. Dick, and we'll also be covering Total Recall, which was directed by Paul Verhoeven and starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the remake Total Recall, directed by Len Wiseman and starring Colin Farrell.
Both interesting directors in movies.
Thanks for that, Dave Wilkinson. So, as I was saying, now we covered Philip K. Dick in our very, very first episode of No Deodorant in Outer Space when we did Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and then we had a different lineup of co-hosts that episode. So,
Who?
It included the other guy who shall not be
James Rock.
Shall not be named.
James
shall
Rock.
not be named.
Beam. James Beam.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we go around the horn and give our opening comments as I cringe to myself? Let's start with Rick. Your opening comment to start off this last show of Season 2. Hit me!
Oh, my God. I really don't have something quick and snappy.
But not surprised
let's
by
see
that
here.
one.
Jesus. Put me on the spot, asshole.
Just like I do every show.
Just
You could almost say it's not really a surprise anymore.
We need to get some kind of format and just stick to it. This
Hey,
is
great
chaos.
idea. Rick, any opening comments? You read the story. You watched the movies. Any just initial summary? One sentence.
Yeah, I appreciated the story and I appreciated all the movies, and they were all really good. I don't really have a favorite. They all have kind of like their own sort of positive things that I took out of them.
Wilk, what about you?
Yeah, like Rick said, I think all three entities of this story have merit, but I like one of the movies way better than the book or the story and the other movie. So, but like the last Philip K. Dick story we read, it kind of fell apart at the end in the literature version, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Very good. And I'll say an early collection of short stories touching on Cold War era fears and other weird pseudo-realities.
Story, you mean? Only one story.
For you, only one story.
For everyone.
So,
matters.
Let's get into the author, Philip K. Dick. Listeners are sure familiar with our first episode, and we sort of covered a very broad, brief overview of Philip K. Dick's life. But I'm going to leave it to Rick now to kind of maybe fill in some of the gaps that were left behind last time when we talked about this very renowned author and very well-known author.
Phil K. Dick, I think we've already established that, Yuri Osborne, his middle name, being established that, he accused Dick of being insane. There's a reason for his sort of eccentricities. The guy, he was pretty much an only child brought up by a single mother. His parents were divorced early on, before I think he was in the second grade. He was always kind of like this sickly, kind of weirdo kind of kid, and I think he was born in Chicago. He grew up in the D.C. area
for a time,
from grades 2 to 4, and then they actually made it out to Berkeley, California. Great university town, and I think Berkeley had a lot to do with his mythos, basically. It was a college campus. It was kind of a hotbed during the time he was there as a teenager for sort of, conflict. People that went to that school, University of California, there were a lot of people that were like in, communist clubs, and they would kind of get together and talk about communism, I think.
Well, this is a very volatile time in America, right, Rick? I mean, this is like during the
like I said, it's the
60s?
We don't really have to kind of do an overview of like how volatile the 60s were. Everyone kind of knows it, or everyone should know it who listens to this podcast.
Well, I don't think you established that this is during the 50s and 60s that he's there.
Right. And
what makes it volatile?
What made it volatile? There was a draft going on. People didn't believe in the war and all of the merits that led us to the war. I think one of the reasons why Kennedy was assassinated was because he made it clear that he was going to pull out of Vietnam, and there were all kinds of sort of paranoid things going on. The federal agents were all over San Francisco, and especially in Berkeley, doing interviews with people that they thought might have been in communist sort of activity.
And that's during the Nixon,
and really
the Nixon
all it was
right?
was just kind of like a bunch of people getting together.
During the Nixon administration?
What was the question? Nixon?
Well, I know Philip K. Dick talked a lot about the Nixon administration.
It wasn't just, Nixon's administration wasn't just the only time he had influence. He had influence even when he first ran against Kennedy, and it was kind of like his brand of politic that kind of took out most of the right wing. That's pretty much when they started their Southern strategy, and they started to divide the United States by racism with capitalism. Okay. And then, that was because before that time, a lot of the racist hillbillies from the South, they voted Democratic religiously, and this was a turning point politically. This? So it was not only contentious with. It was not only contentious with college students at the time when people were getting drafted left and right, but it was also kind of like a political turning point. So with Republican and Democratic
Party. But the relevancy to Philip K. Dick was, a lot of people say, and we discussed this in our last episode of Philip K. Dick, he struggled probably with mental issues. He saw various, psychiatrists or psychologists throughout his life. He might have.
Well, yeah, he started seeing a psychiatrist, I think, when he was like 17.
Yeah. But the relevance that I'm saying that comes into play here is that Philip K. Dick was known as being kind of paranoid and always worried about things. However, that was the vibe at the time going on. People were being investigated for being communists and stuff. So as much as Philip K. Dick might have had mental issues going on and being paranoid, there was actual stuff going on and people being investigated. And I think we even talked about in the last episode that, Philip K. Dick, I think, was, approached by FBI agents and stuff.
Right, yeah, he was rightfully paranoid, and, that causes people a lot of anxiety and, sometimes despair when they don't really have kind of like a regular job. I mean, the guy wrote his whole life, basically, other than working at a record store, which I guess some of his friends described him as kind of coming out of his shell when he started working for the record store. Because, I mean, he was basically, that was kind of like a retail job. he kind of had to press the flesh a little bit and talk to people and find out what they liked in music, and then find, whatever music they like. His personal favorites were like the classical composers. And he had a group of friends. They had a radio station. They played a lot of the classic music. And he only went to Berkeley, the University of California, for like a semester. And then he was like honorably discharged. And from that point on, he basically started writing. And with all that writing, he also sort of, he followed sort of like this didactic life where he would just read profusely and educate himself as much as he possibly could.
So he was a very self-taught author, like I think some of the authors we've read have been. That's kind of where he came from.
So the reasons why people think like he's insane is because I think like it was really kind of his job to express like everything that he thought. Like he's an author, he needs to express himself. So whatever kind of little meaning he can dig out of life, he chose to make sort of like a big deal out of it. People would think that he was maybe having delusions and maybe he was hallucinating. He did trip on LSD a couple of times, but he would describe symbolism in real life and it would just completely hit him and make him believe that he was a conduit of God and a Messiah. And I think the last couple years of his life, he'd stay up like late every night and he would write his exegesis, which is it's kind of like a philosophical laboratory for his beliefs and how they're founded and how they're all justified. And it's almost like he's questioning everything he believes in and trying to work everything out with the English language. Well,
you're talking about the later part of his life where he actually his writing sort of shifted and he got more religious.
But like I'm just kind of like alluding to how he took himself so seriously and how like all of his observations were sort of like accounted for. Even like the hallucinations were. His friend who sold him LSD said his worst LSD trip, the period that was his worst, kind of led him to believe that he had a parallel life, which was that of a persecuted Christian back in like the 100 AD century, and he was being persecuted by centurions, and he was one of the original Christians in his parallel life. He was sure of this, all right. And on his acid trip, it was the worst point of his acid trip when he was speaking clear Latin to his friend, and he never.
Another writer. Yeah,
he never took a Latin. He never took a Latin course in his entire life. And he was speaking like coherent, grammatically correct Latin to him.
Yeah.
And I guess he was just sort of like freaking himself out. But
how would he know if it's correct if he never spoke it?
Well, no,
I don't know. Maybe his friend was tripping.
The other guy I think was a writer.
Yeah, the other writer, his friend.
And that's wild.
And I saw the other. I saw on that documentary.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who was there talked about it, and he said that guy knew Latin. That's how he knew that Philip K. Dick was speaking Latin.
And just because he knew Latin, I don't know, it doesn't really still make it like factual, because the guy who knew Latin might have been hallucinating that his friend was speaking Latin.
Right.
Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, and if I can ask a question about that, I mean, we like this guy. He writes cool shit and he does drugs, things we can get behind. But if someone came to you and said I went to church and I spoke in Aramaic, would you believe them? I wouldn't. I mean, it seems kind of dubious that he could just speak Latin like that.
Yeah,
but interesting nonetheless.
But the other thing is, Philip K. Dick, if anything, he's probably very intelligent, and he's also very well read. So, I think there's sort of a basis to him having.
And there's plenty of Latin in the English language too, which you could sort of synthesize. And I don't know, LSD is a funny drug. I mean, you really kind of open the mind's eye to new things when you're on it. So I don't really.
Sorry. The other drug of choice for him, which he was really big into, is my understanding, is he was really big into amphetamines.
Well, just to be clear, so our listeners know, are we endorsing amphetamines or LSD? Because, I mean, frankly, I want our listeners to use LSD, and I'm not sure about amphetamines, but we got to take a stance. Are we pro-LSD or
I think in order for Ryan to sort of make some kind of impact in his writing career, he needs to go on both.
Well, at least.
Well, Philip K. Dick was really big on amphetamines, and for a while he did it just to...
He started on amphetamines, and that's how he would sort of like stay up and write.
Right, he did it to increase his writing output, because back in the day, I don't think he was getting paid a lot for his writing. In fact, most of his life he was spent poor, and I don't think he was making good money till later, much later in his life. And Blade Runner came out after he died, but he saw the final rushes of it before he died. But I was described in one of these interviews or documentaries I saw where Philip K. Dick would just take like whole handfuls of amphetamines and just indulge in them.
Right.
And he did this just to increase his writing output and probably to the detriment of his health. I mean, obviously that's not going to help anyone.
Right. So I mean, he completely lacks his own sleep and his own health as an effect of that. And he had definite mood swings. He went through 5 wives.
Right.
I guess all of his wives had some certain characteristics in common. A lot of them had long, dark brunette hair, and they all were sort of like these projects for any man, really. But he would sort of take on all of the upfront sort of conflict and try and make it better. He tried and change like these women who were sort of downtrodden in their lives.
Yeah.
And
then he would get bored and he would move on to someone else that had issues.
Well, I don't know if it was that he got bored or, a lot of the exes complained that, he was an extreme gentleman, but he was extremely paranoid too. And they started to find out like the level of his paranoia and, maybe he was just such a freaky dude talking about these parallel lives and how he was just so convinced that all of this shit was real and not really sure if, how to prove it or anything like that. I mean, I think he just kind of did a good job freaking everybody out around him, and he was always transient with people.
Well, I think that from what I could gather from one of these documentaries is that he kind of wanted to be like the knight in shining armor and be helping these women. And then when things would get on track, I think and the thing was with him, he didn't really have all his marbles together, or he didn't, have all his stuff together.
Right.
So he wasn't always in a good position to really help someone out for the long term. So he
never was. He grew up poor. He remained poor almost his entire life.
He also lived an erratic lifestyle, taking drugs, and whenever he parted ways with
a lot of the drug taking though in the beginning was basically just for his own productivity, and he was very successful, generating the volume that he did. I mean, he wrote and wrote and wrote, and he really never stopped.
Right. But he also died. Did he die in his 50s?
He died of a stroke, and he was like 52 or 54 or something like that.
Yeah.
But
I understand with his wives that in between his wives he would
crash. Yeah, like all right. So like another interesting thing about Philip K. Dick was that he had a house in Berkeley, and basically it was opened up to
Did you have a garage sale?
Whoever. What was that? Well,
did you ever a garage sale?
No, he didn't have a garage sale.
Oh.
No, I mean it was open to like pretty much every transient who needed to crash, and there was a lot of drugs that went through there, and a lot of his closer friends thought that he had this open house basically to get his hands on additional amphetamines to keep his work flowing like the only way he knew how, basically. So yeah, I mean he was extremely addicted to that, and I mean just. The cycles, the weekly cycles he would go through. I mean, he'd sleep for 24 hours, then he'd stay awake for 3-4 days.
Yeah.
Not go to sleep. I mean, it was just brutal.
It was interesting, too, to hear one of his stepdaughters talk about how, at some point he got interested in religion. And she said, like, it was like he was this, like, fine, upstanding guy who would, like, go to church and make sure everyone got dressed up to go to church and stuff like that.
Yeah. And he believed in, like, God was indifferent and, evil at the same time. And he actually befriended the bishop of the Episcopalian Church, and he would have, like, these discussions with, like, the lead, priest of this parish, and I mean, it was just like so
and what did
amazingly
that have to do with
crazy.
The stories that we read, but what did any of this have to do with what we were reading? Like,
because he believed in this alternate sort of system of ethics and morale. When he's talking about the god of evil, he's talking about a parallel universe, and that is reflected in all of his work. Well,
okay,
I mean,
how is it reflected in the Blade Runner book, or the do androids dream like sheep, or I mean, the alternate universe thing?
Because it was reflected in Blade Runner because the main character of Blade Runner was, and I didn't really read the book, but from what I understand, he was always flipping between having some kind of compassion for the robot and not.
That's not fair. That's not fair if you haven't read it. Then the one that we read right now, I mean, I didn't get any alternate universe idea in here. I got a very
of course there was.
Universe.
There was an alternate universe. The guy was living a life as a factory worker when he really wasn't. And it was like his own struggle to
but
overcome his own
that's not
memory
an alternate
problem.
universe. That's maybe a metaphor, but an alternate universe is an alternate universe. I mean,
I'm not
especially in
talking
science
about
fiction.
the like external sense. I'm talking about the internal sense.
Yeah, but that's not an alternate universe. That's just like a change in
I mean, it is your
identity.
world in your mind, basically. It's
Yeah,
two
but it's not an
clashing
alternate
worlds.
universe. I mean, that's not what an alternate universe is.
It's an alternate reality. That's what I'm kind of getting at.
What's alternate reality? So it's like, no, I mean, I see a thread of chaos in all Philip K. Dick's work, and I like that, and I think that, I mean, I think he has trouble ending things, but I mean, I think he's got a very powerful imagination, and it makes sense that he'd be, I mean, it's schizophrenic, it's chaotic, the way that his stories are structured in some shape, way, or form. Like, the endings, the middle, and the beginnings aren't always that congruent with each other. And that's that.
Yeah, okay. Well, he's constantly questioning reality, which does come up in the story we read.
Oh, absolutely.
Is this real? Are my memories real? I mean, that also happens in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And
I would agree with that, yeah.
It's a question of reality. It's not just another universe. It says, what does it mean to be... I mean, I think Philip K. Dick was going totally like philosophical, like, what is real? Is what I'm perceiving real? Or is the collective agreement among the people of what is real? Is that what's real? Is our perception real?
Yeah. Very introspective, very into like mind games.
Yes.
Like both internal and external, I'd say.
Yes. And I think that's what Rick is getting at with all talking about his history and him, you know, doing all these drugs and constantly and living like these kind of like dual lives where he gets really religious, but then he goes and he does drugs, and at some point he's living on his own and he's living in like a flap house. He opens his house up to the public and anyone can kind of come in. It's like another extreme. He's probably not caring for himself or his surroundings very well.
Well, let me ask you, based on what you two have studied and gathered here, do you think he was happy? Do you think he was a happy guy at the end of the day? Or do you think he was content with himself? Or do you think he felt like he was a big fuck around screw up?
I think he was self-aware.
Okay.
I think listening to his interviews and listening to people talk about him, he knew, I think, that he had issues. He'd been seeing psychologists and doctors his whole life, and when he would say things like, well, I think a beam of light hit me and it was a message from God, or it might have been a message from the Soviets, or it might have been, and he would go on all these theories, and I think he realized that he had issues, and
I like that, because I feel like a lot of his antagonists don't really like themselves that much. They're not bad people, but they're like, they got low self-esteem in a lot of cases. And I don't know.
The antagonist.
Protagonist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they don't. I think that kind of relates to his upbringing and the fact that his life was pretty oppressed. He never had money. He was always kind of scrapping away. There was a point where he was homeless. He owed the money. He owed the IRS back taxes, and he was constantly running all the time. So he just never had resources to settle down. Man, his life was chaotic.
He fled to Canada for a while, and he checked himself into like a serious rehab place. And then out of that,
I think he was in Vancouver to give a speech. And he met a woman in the crowd, and it was like another project for him. And they tried to settle down in Vancouver, and they lived with one of her friends, and that friend couldn't keep him around because after 2 weeks, I mean, he was just completely unstable in that house. And that's when he tried to commit suicide after that.
Yeah.
But that was like his last straw. But he was able to recover, and he lived for another 10 years or so.
He constantly had issues throughout his life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we talked about a lot there. I don't know if there's anything else to add. We covered him in a previous episode. We got a little bit more into it this time. I know you mentioned an interesting anecdote to me offline, Rick, that the author Heinlein, who we covered in Starship Troopers, offered to pay Philip K. Dick's rent at some point.
Right. Yeah. Like that was kind of a great thing in Dick's eyes, because he didn't think Heinlein was good for that kind of gesture, and Heinlein made it.
I know. Heinlein was so fucking cheap. I mean, the fact that he would pay his rent shows that he thought Philip K. Dick was something special. Heinlein would never even leave a fucking tip at a restaurant, I heard.
Is that right?
Recently.
Jesus.
Yeah. He was like he didn't believe tipping was cool. He's like, I pay for my food. It's on them. He was a cheap.
It was
cheap
more.
guy.
It was, but it was a political thing that Philip K. Dick was questioning. Is that what you were saying, Rick?
Well, not only that. I mean, he described Heinlein's entire character. He was ultra conservative. He was very militaristic. He had a crew cut, and it was just like he was extremely conservative. And Philip K. Dick being sort of like this hippie freak from Berkeley with an open house full of, who knows what kind of addicts. But, I mean, he just didn't expect that. It came out of the blue, and it just sort of shows how Heinlein had such a respect for all of Dick's work. He's a genius. And when you get to that kind of level...
Heinlein pays your rent.
Well, yeah, sure.
That's the level we all want to get
Did he
to.
actually pay his rent, or he just offered?
No, it's not the rent. It was Heinlein actually paid his back taxes to the IRS.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Was there any, hanky-panky? Like, they had to give Heinlein a little to get it done, or?
There was probably some kind of understanding there.
Probably a little quid pro quo.
So I think that's going to wrap it up for Philip K. Dick. So why don't we just get into the book or story? We were covering The Preserving Machine and other stories. I know not everyone on the panel tonight has read all the stories. The main story, of course, we're going to cover is We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. I'll just say this collection is a collection of earlier stories, I think from the 50s and 60s, and I think We Can Remember It For You Wholesale is the latest story in there. I don't know if that was from 1966, but it's really an early collection of stories by Dick, and probably different than his later writing. Rick, did you read some of the stories? Did you have any favorites in there besides We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which we'll get into next? But is there any of the stories that stuck out to you? I mean, I would say for me, I noticed that throughout these stories that you could kind of hear, feel, and read echoes of the Cold War going on. Some of the stories directly dealt with war, but they also dealt with sort of paranoia of being taken over and stuff. You have either alien civilizations coming in to invade or other species coming in to invade, these kind of things. What did you think of the story War Game, which was about those toys that were designed?
I didn't enjoy it.
No.
I kind of skimmed through that one. It got really kind of detailed with, I think it was the engineers talking about the toys, and that didn't really hit me like it. I guess it hit you.
It was interesting in the sense that the conclusion of it was that these toys were being engineered to kind of subjugate mankind into teaching men to accept loss.
Smart. It's like smartphones.
I feel like the endings in a lot of these stories, there was typical, not necessarily super original endings to these stories. And kind of like the title story here that we're covering today, or not the title story.
I thought the title had a super original ending.
Or The Preserving Machine?
No, we'll remember it for you wholesale.
Well, let me ask you before we get into that, The Preserving Machine, that was the first story, which is the book was named after. Did you like that story, which is about a guy being concerned that culture is being lost, that music's being lost, so he's taking music, and to preserve the music for the ages, he's having it converted through this machine that turns it into animals.
Right. I did not appreciate that. It wasn't well-founded. The science wasn't there. I understand Philip K. Dick, he took a zoology class, and he took all kinds of self-portraits with his self-sticky, with a cat, and he's just like a cat person. He loves animals, and I couldn't possibly imagine how you would capture, a single sheet of music in an animal. Mm-hmm. I just okay, this is just absolutely off the wall. It's too magical, and he's not writing about magic. He's writing about sort of
science
and reality, and it's just oh my god, this is all over the place, man. But he does have crazy concepts. They just weren't clicking. They weren't firing for me. I was I just didn't take it seriously.
Well, to me on that one, I
So you're picking all the ones that I kind of skimmed through. I didn't have a lot of sort of attention for, basically.
I think that on the surface level of some of these, they seem kind of almost silly. And Philip K. Dick has a sort of very easily accessible writing style. It's not overly verbose.
Right.
And so some of the complexities are buried within the words, I think, and that's what I felt last time when we read them.
The complexities are in the concepts that he's talking about.
In this one, The Preserving Machine, where they're preserving music through animals, I think when I was kind of preparing for the show and reading other people's thoughts and stuff on this, is that what's interesting is that they release these animals that are embodiments of the music into the wild, and then these animals sort of go wild and attack and I don't know if they're kind of voracious and stuff. And when they try to reconvert them back to music, it doesn't work. The music is distorted.
Because nature is a very powerful thing with living beings, and They had went through some kind of evolutionary process, and
Yeah.
things did. I mean, there was like the moral of that story, right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like the deeper underpinning meaning to this is like,
Could you make a movie
the
out of
whole-
that story? I mean, how would you?
Well, I don't
make that-
know that you could, but I think it's
As a
an interesting
movie.
comment about preserving things and culture and how everything interacts with everything else.
I was just annoyed because he didn't even describe any kind of like mechanism that allowed them to extract music from animals. It was just like annoying. How do these animals capture music? I have no idea.
No, I mean, like, a lot of his stories that I have read are just so drug-addled and paranoid-ridden. I mean, like, I don't know. I think it's comical that people sit there and take him that seriously. He had some good stuff, but I mean, like, even this Total Recall, which was a great movie, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger in a remake, had nothing to do with this story. I mean, the bare bones. I mean, his stories have a lot of nonsense in there, too. I mean, they get some great concepts, but I don't know. The finished product execution isn't really that coherent, and that's kind of his style.
The concepts though are so they're so packaged and condensed though. They're so good.
Yeah,
he's so good at like sort of like developing these things. I think like the movie producers take pleasure in sort of extrapolating from what he started.
He's an ideas writer. He comes up with really good ideas.
Yeah, you compare it to like something like Ray Bradbury, who like has very concise short stories that have like a good beginning, middle, and end. He's not like that, but yeah, he's more abstract, LSD-ish,
Right. Yeah, and I like the fact that you mentioned that the two movies, I mean, they really had nothing to do with the actual the source of the story. The source of the story actually just mentioned very briefly of the main character in his in his saboteur or agent life that he went through like a dozen bodyguards before he assassinated the leader of the resistance. And it was just that like one or two sentences that basically opened up all of the imagination for these two movies, basically.
Well, Wilk, why don't you recount the story to us, which is different? It's slightly different than the movies. Why don't you give us a quick synopsis?
Slightly different? It's not even like the same. There's nothing similar about it. I mean, basically,
well, it's not nothing similar. I mean, he goes to a recall place and all that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, give us a synopsis of the actual short story.
In the story, you have a normal person. I believe he has like a clerky type job named Quail, and he wants to go to Mars, but he can't afford it. So he goes to a place where they'll implant a memory from going to Mars. And when he goes in there, he remembers that he was at Mars before. He was a secret agent, and these had all been erased. And then there's, police are coming to his house to kill him. He's got an implant in his brain, and then aliens work into there somehow too. And it turns out his 9-year-old self so impressed an advanced race, they decided to not kill the entire planet because he was such an amazing 9-year-old. Which to me, I was just kind of like laughing in an annoying way as I read that. I'm like, this is just one of the worst endings for a story I've ever read.
Well, you kind of glanced over a bit there. So the tension of the story is he was a secret agent and his memories come to resurface, like in the movies, because he goes to this recall place to get an implant, and they can't implant something that actually already happened. And it turns out he was really a secret agent. And and they want to kill him off because he's going crazy over this. So when he agrees to like let them fix his memory, they offer an alternative memory, which is that he's such an important person that some aliens came down and they were going to invade Earth, but they decide not to because he's such a pious person. And it turns out when they want to implant that memory, it's actually true. And so they decide they can't plant that memory because that also happened to him, that is in none of the movie. And it did seem like
it's terrible.
It's like almost like a cop-out kind of solution, but these were short
stories.
The short stories, he's trying to wrap it up, and I don't know.
And I love that ending of the short story. And
you do? Why? Why do you love that ending?
Why? Because it just showed his the main character's chivalry and his sense of virtue and his ethics. Basically, it was his own ethics that basically saved the planet Earth. And it was out of this scene where these aliens had landed, and the aliens start coming out of the spaceship, and they're no larger than little mice, and they're coming out of the spaceship, and the mice had talked to him, and he had enough respect to basically not kill any of them because he could have just stepped onto one of them, and they told him they told him their plans to take over the planet, and he's like, well, I think he made just some kind of like charitable gesture, and they backed off, thinking that the entire human race was like him, and they wouldn't want to take over the planet Earth if this is the kind of race that they would be, exterminating.
Well, the catch was that they would not take over the planet Earth while he was still alive. So that's
Right,
why
right.
the government could not assassinate him or get rid of him, because that would endanger the entire planet.
Yeah.
And none of the directors in any of these movies chose to include that.
But like that whole scene was conjured up by the police agency, who was reading his mind, and they dug up this fantasy that he had about himself being the most important man on the planet.
Uh-huh.
And they only thought it was a fantasy by reading his mind, because it was like plasma injected into his brain, and they were able to sort of read everything in his mind, all the symbologies, everything, and then talk to him. They'd be able to communicate to him. And they saw this as a fantasy. They didn't realize it was true.
I thought it was more coincidence. I thought that they just came up with this idea, and it turned out that it actually happened to him. It was kind of almost random.
No, it was not that was not a coincidence.
That's how I read it.
The way that was brought out was, he basically kind of wimped out, and he didn't want to fight. And he's like, well, why don't you guys just give me a better memory implant? Don't make me a factory worker, because I'm just bored to death with that thing.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I went to recall in the first place. Make me feel like I'm special, that.
Yeah.
And that's how that sort of surfaced. And I thought that was just sort of like an amazing twist.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get right into the movies then, since we're running low on time? Let's start with the 2012 version first. That was directed by Len Wiseman and starred Colin Farrell. Wilk, do you want to tell us a little bit about that director, Len Wiseman, or anything about the background of?
Yeah. Len Wiseman's a really interesting guy. He's an American. He's born in California. His movie, he's a fanboy. Like he loves the 80s action flicks that most people like in our age demographic. White males of a certain age, like your Lethal Weapon movies, your Arnold movies. He loves all that crap that. And when he got into directing, before that, he was doing a lot of music videos for some of the hardcore bands. He won in a
Static X.
Static X was one. And I think, didn't the guy from Static X just die recently?
That might be
I
true.
think so.
Yeah. But so then he had his own little baby called Underworld, which he co-wrote and directed, about vampires against werewolves. Frankly, it's a pretty cool concept. Low budget movie, but he made it work. He was very good at using his budget effectively for digital effects and actors, and he got Kate Beckinsale to come into the movie. And during that production, he and Kate Beckinsale were both married to other people, and by the time they made the next one, they were married to each other. And now they're getting divorced. They just announced last month that they're breaking up again. But so
how many movies are there of those? Is there 4 Underworld?
They're making the 5th one right now. I don't know how many have Kate Beckinsale. He's only directed 2 of them, but he has writing credits on the characters, so he's pretty much set for life.
Didn't he produce the later ones too, even though he didn't write them? He was involved with them, I think, right?
He's got he created the credit. He may have produced them or may have just gotten a credit for them, but he gets paid every time they make Underworld because he co-created it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how that works exactly in Hollywood with the production rights, but yeah, he lobbied very hard to make the 4th Die Hard movie, Live Free or Die Hard, which was the first one, I believe, that was PG-13. And gosh darn it, it just wasn't that good. But again, he was a huge fan of the franchise, and he lobbied hard to make Total Recall, and he loved the first Total Recall movie. But he said, I'm going to make it different because it was such a good movie. I don't want to try to remake it. I'm going to make one that's more faithful to the book. And he did. But in my opinion, the movie wasn't that great. And he's not a horrible director, but he's made movies that I didn't like Total Recall. I just didn't find it. I mean, and it really, I feel like I should have liked it. I mean, I don't like Colin Farrell, but I like everyone else in that movie. Bryan Cranston, some of the better actors around playing the villain, and Jessica Biel, who's not hard in the eyes, and Kate Beckinsale, also both good actresses in their own right. And so, but it just didn't.
A lot of good acting talent in this movie.
A lot.
Yeah.
Colin Farrell is a good actor. I just don't like him. But I mean,
well, Rick, do you want to give us a quick synopsis on this 2012 remake? I mean, it is different than the story and the earlier movie.
Quite. Well, let's see. This movie was heavy on action, and I didn't necessarily have a problem with it. It's just that.
But I mean, what's the differences? What's the actual differences between this plot? Or Wilk, do you want to do it? Do you want to
The difference between the movies or the difference between the book?
The difference between this
plot.
the difference between this movie and the other movie and the in the story.
Well, they don't go to Mars in this movie.
That's one major difference.
Big difference. I'd say that's the biggest difference. And again, it has a more imagined, more worked out version of the future. More detail is given to that than in the 80s version. Where the 80s version was really just a set piece for good action sequences and kind of did a little world building. And I don't know. I mean, he's big into world building. Like with the Underworld franchises, he creates a little world within a world, and he was good at that. It just
well, this one is set entirely on Earth, right? There's two places. There's like was it Great Britain or something, and the colonies.
Oh yeah,
and it's like two sides of the world, and they're connected through this like tunnel that cuts through the center of the earth, and workers are transported from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, and to work. And I guess there's like a caste system going on, which is in the other movies. And the workers from the colonies, I think, are sort of being oppressed by the workers in the Great Britain aspect of the world. Right. And so there's in this story, there's no mutants or anything like in the 1990 remake. But there is like a dual caste system where there's these kind of workers and then the people who are not workers. So that's probably one of the major differences.
Yeah, what's kind of funny is they use the same name for
Huge.
Recall, which was Quaid, but not Quail. Which is, I don't know. I mean, it's like I think he didn't know what he was. He was basically trying to remake a movie that he loved, but not. I don't know. It's like he was trying to make it so different from that. That was his sounding board. Like he would well, I'm not going to do what they did here, but he paid tribute to it too with the dames, and there's even the teardrop scene too in this one. Where
he also included that the lady in the yellow jacket with the red hair.
Yeah, that's right.
Nothing happened to her though. I mean, he did pay a lot of tribute to the first movie.
Yeah, there's some scenes he sort of there's some definite just tribute scenes to the first movie.
Yeah.
Which he loved. I mean, and again, yeah, he was a protege of Emmerich, the German director that makes terrible movies, but big budget ones like Day After Tomorrow and all that kind of stuff. So
Ew.
I don't know. There's a place in the universe for these people, but this wasn't one of his better works.
Well, why do you think that this one was not as good as the original?
Well, the original, I mean, you had that, transition from Earth to Mars. You've got a really mind-bending story where you're trying to... Which is not in the story.
No, the short story never goes to Mars. There's just an illusion of Mars.
But to me, going to Mars is a pretty cool concept. I mean, I love them. I don't know. I like that. He basically, puts an atmosphere on a dead planet and, saves the world, gets the girl, and then you have to debate whether it's real or not the whole time. And there's lots of Easter eggs in the movie. I don't know. It's great. It's the guy that did RoboCop. It's a lot like RoboCop by design. It's ultra violent. It's got great practical effects. It's really everything I like about movies, and it's one of my favorite movies to be honest. So I saw it in the theater 3 times when I was a kid.
Yeah, Quayle's life and Quaid's wife in the 1980s movie Sharon Stone, man.
Sharon Stone.
That was like 19. Okay, Sharon Stone had like an edge on that character. I loved it.
Yeah. Well, funny story. Yeah.
What was her name? Kate Beckinsale didn't really have that edge. I mean, she did, but it just wasn't like Sharon Stone.
And Sharon Stone was cast in Basic Instinct by the same director based on her performance in that movie because the director said, well, she's got this little quality about her where she can both be devious and innocent at the same time. Kind of keeps you guessing. And she was great. Yeah. Considered a divorce. Yeah, God.
She was.
Did you guys feel between the two movies there, which is a definitely a Philip K. Dick thing which is an ambiguity. Okay, Philip K. Dick plays with reality and ambiguity. Did this actually happen? Was it all a dream? That's sort of a Philip K. Dick trope. So, did you feel that was strong in both movies, or did you think it wasn't? I mean, I kind of felt that in the original one it was a little bit more strong.
Yeah, I agree. The second one I felt like was more real, based in reality. Like he was on Earth, and that I don't know. There was no fantasy really happening there. It was a pretty gritty movie, comparably speaking, I'd say.
I think the 2012. It was 2012. Yeah. I think it did walk that line.
You do.
I mean, yeah.
So you felt like at times it was like, yeah, you were questioning: could this all be a dream, or is this really happening?
Right. Huh. Correct. Yeah. You'd probably be a lot less sure though if you didn't read the book and you didn't see the previous movie though.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was kind of
Well,
anticipating
and again, the original one was just so much fun. I mean, like it was such a wild fantasy in the way the movie
Mhm.
played out. I mean, that it's an ultimate guy fantasy, so it's like you really are. It's like you want it to be true, but you're like, come on, that's got to be in his head because it's just too perfect. And again, when he's in the recall facility in the first one, the guy even says, "Huh, blue sky on Mars," and like you can see them programming the things inside his head that happen later. Even the woman that he meets up with. So it's probably all a dream, or it's probably all a memory. The first one.
Well, going back to the original one, do you have anything to add, Wilk? I mean, we already talked about Verhoeven in the previous episode when we covered Starship Troopers, but do you have anything to add about him or the production of the original movie?
Just a quick anecdote. I think we were talking about it before, where the movie was originally cast Richard Dreyfuss as the lead, playing an accountant.
What?
Yep. And then Jeff Bridges was put in the role. Then Arnold Schwarzenegger, coming off all the Terminator movies and the king of the '80s, he sees the script and says, "I want to make this movie." And he loved RoboCop, so he literally went to Paul Verhoeven when he saw him at an outdoor cafe and said, "I need you to make this movie." And so Schwarzenegger brings Verhoeven into the studio, and they come in there together with no script, and they write a script around this movie, with human shields and everything else, and like the effects in the movie were really, it's one of the last great practical effect movies, I think. There was like a 6-man team for the puppet on the guy that pops out of the stomach, whose name I'm blanking on right now, and they had to do like incredible motion capture photography for that skeleton scene in the metal detectors and stuff like that.
No, but you know what? I read that they tried motion capture on
what was that? Tell me. Yeah.
So there's a scene where it's like almost like in an airport where someone's going through like an X-ray machine and you could see the skeleton of the person and identifies if there's weapons. But I read that they tried motion capture to create that and it didn't work. So I don't.
Yeah, there was something about motion capture there.
They said they already had the movements of Arnold, so I'm not sure if they just ended up drawing it.
Maybe they animated it. That's probably it.
Yeah, I think they might have just animated it because the motion capture failed. But that's what they tried to
do. Right. Okay. Yeah. But
that was a very cool effect, and that stuck with me through the years. When I think of Total Recall, I think of that scene, and that kind of also goes on to another thing I was thinking about with that original movie is that Paul Verhoeven really did a good job of kind of like eluding all the things that happened in that movie. For instance, I was listening to an interview where he said, in one of the first scenes where Quaid is waking up with his wife and he's at home, and they turn on the news, and this whole wall lights up and shows the news, and then the wife turns it off, and it turns into this like quaint forest scene, and it's this huge, it's like the whole wall changes, it's like a virtual reality thing almost. And he said, we had to do that because we had to get the viewer set up for the fact that later on we're going to be implanting memories and we're going to be going to Mars and stuff. And he did a great job throughout that movie of setting things up, like that sensor you're just talking about, the X-ray machine where they show the skeletons. At first, you see the main character go through that, and you just see how the machine functions. And then later on, you come back to it, and there's an action sequence that happens through it where they show Arnold Schwarzenegger's character have a gun. And you're ready for something crazy to happen. Or you see, like, there's a scene, like, when they go to Mars, there's scenes where these tunneling machines are kind of coming out of, like, they're in the peripherals of the shots while Arnold Schwarzenegger's character is going around. And then later on, the tunneling machines are used to try to thwart the main character. Like, I just thought throughout that movie, Verhoeven did, like, it's just an excellent, almost perfect job of just setting everything up that you just went along for the ride. You believed everything. It didn't seem hokey. And I'll tell you what, this movie made in the 90s, it holds up 100% in my opinion today. Practical effects, different standards. I mean, even the shots of Mars, the outside shots, and the scenes they were probably making out of cardboard and stuff that I was reading in another review, it all holds up in my opinion. It just it all feels believable for what they tried to do. I don't know how you guys felt.
I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve here. How about you, Rick? Did you get hate it?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed that movie. I saw it when I was a kid, and I mean, I was allowed to kind of see our movies when I was like, 10, 11. No, actually, I was 11 when I saw that. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
So, yeah, I just think that movie really holds up over time.
I agree.
It really does. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is like
apologetic.
Is in the peak of his one-liners, and they play right into it with the script, and it all works. You know,
it was a big movie for him too. One of the last big ones he made.
He said, "I'll be back" in that one, right?
Oh yeah, in the airport, I believe.
But he'd already said it. in Terminator, right?
Well,
he says it in every movie.
Yeah, Terminator's the first one, I think, though.
Yeah.
Maybe Conan.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But they play into his whole one-liner mystique and motif. They play into it, but they don't overplay into it, and it just works. The whole thing just works.
Well, a good Arnold movie, you got to be able to. They used him well because you don't want him doing a whole lot of dialogue. You know, you want good actors around him to make the movie a little bit better, and they did. Like I love that scene in the first one too, where the director of Recall is telling him to take the pill, and he ends up sees the sweat on his head, and he pops him in the head with a bullet.
Yeah.
Arnold can do intensity, that's for sure.
You know what was interesting, I thought, is how bright the sets are. Like, he goes into, like, sort of like a seedy, almost like strip club kind of thing, and everything is brightly lit. I thought
it's the 80s, man.
That was, like, kind of odd, I thought. It didn't have, like a Ridley Scott kind of, like, vibe or aura to it. And it reminded me, okay, this is how this director is. Like, I think that's how, like... And it also, like, how Starship Trooper was. There's a lot going on with TVs and propaganda and stuff like that is constantly being thrown at you, just like Starship Troopers. I mean, you could tell Verhoeven's got his thumbprint throughout this movie, you know?
Yeah. And I don't know, we're kind of past the topic already, but the latter movie made in 2012, I thought that sort of paid a little homage to Blade Runner with the Asian motif and with kind of like the synthetic prostitute, robots walking around and
the sets.
Like
I think the sets,
the rainy climate and the sets, obviously, yeah.
Philip K. Dick has definitely, made a big impression in the sci-fi community. And even when they're covering his work, they're reaching into his whole mystique to create it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I appreciated that.
No, and again, I don't mean to disparage him too much. I mean, I think he's a really interesting author. He's just his style. Yeah, he has these great ideas. Not always the best endings, I'd say, but I've liked the thing I've read overall by him.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that'll do it. Why don't we just wrap it up and give any final comments? I'll just go ahead and say I'll give the book 3 stars. I'll say it's probably more like 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's a nice snapshot into his early writing. And if you're a Philip K. Dick fan, it's definitely worth checking out, and it doesn't disappoint. I think the endings, some of them, like, they're not so crazy as you would think they might be for a Philip K. Dick thing, but they are short stories, and they had to be ended. That's one of the things that I felt kind of, I don't know if they were just odd or fell a little short or just didn't have, like, a mind-boggling ending on some of the stories. But the original movie from 1990, I mean, I'll give that 5 stars. Watching it again now, it blew me away how much I still loved it. And I think the 1990s one, I'll just give 3 stars, or the 2012 one, I'll give 3 stars. Rick, let's go to you.
I'm gonna kind of give all of it 5 stars. I really enjoyed the short story. It was probably one of the better short stories I've ever read. And, each movie had classic elements in their own right. And they were 2 very different movies, but, they were great. In that, I especially like the second one because it did indulge with kind of like the Philip K. Dick world a little bit more than the first one. But the first one was extremely engaging, and it was great for the time. It was great for 1990, and I don't know about it holding up like what Ryan is saying, but I think anything with Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of like decays a little bit. But yeah, I really appreciated that one too. So
all right, well,
5 across the board.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan. Oddly enough, tonight, I think the short story was about a 3-star deal, and the movie's about as good as they come as far as
which movie
this genre goes. The 1990 version. 2012, I mean, like, if you're a fan of the original, like I am, I mean, I saw that in the theater when it came out, and, I don't hate it as much now as I did then. Yeah, I'd give it about 2.5 stars. It's worth watching, but it's not that great.
So would you give the 1990 version of the movie 5 stars?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. All right, cool, guys. Then I'll say, this is the last show of this season, so I'll just say visit nodeodorant.com to see what's in store for us next, and continue to rate us on iTunes. You can also, follow us on YouTube, and we have a Facebook page, and we also are on TuneIn Radio and just various other sources you can find podcasts.
Everywhere.
We're everywhere. We're all over the interweb. And
in your face.
Check your Androids for electric sheep. So other than that, I guess we'll all say an enthusiastic good night. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Yay. Good night. Yay. Yay. Okay. All right.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode, or to read our show notes and find us on social media, visit nodeodorant.com. For more information on Ryan Sean O'Reilly and his various works of fiction, visit ryanseano'reilly.com. For more information on David Wilkinson, visit drycracker.com. For more information on Richard Mell, check out his profile at goodreads.com. The theme music for this podcast was written by John Doyle from the band I Decline. You can visit him at i-decline.com. Voiceover for this podcast was provided by me, Margaret O'Reilly. Well, that concludes our episode. We hope you've learned a lot. Again, thanks for listening to our show. And always, always remember, there is no deodorant in outer space.
Fucking 75 stars, man.
Both interesting directors and movies.
Thanks for that, Dave Wilkinson. Any further updates besides your general incompetence?
Yeah, you're an asshole.
Let me just give you this little tasty quote from the story.
Wait, is that really an
He
update?
awoke and wanted Mars, the valleys he
Yeah, like
thought.
update
What
would
would it
imply
be
there's
like
some
to
kind of
trudge among
evolution.
them? Great and greater yet.
You're still an asshole, I
The
guess.
dream
Not
grew
really an
as he
update.
became fully conscious. The dream and the yearning.
The degree of
Update,
assholeness
you
was
know,
You're
Increasing.
still an
increasing.
asshole.
Presence of the other
No
world.
change in status.
Only government agents and high officials had seen.
There is a delta
Update.
there.
Clerk like
Will.
himself.
Still
Not likely.
ass.
So,
Oh.
as I was saying, Rick, is your microphone actually pointed down towards your mouth? I can't even see it.
Let's see.
No, it's not. It's pointed up towards your head.
Here, I'll bring it down like this.
Oh, much
Is that
better.
better?
Completely different, actually. I can actually totally hear
Oh.
you much better.
All right, good.
Amazing. These are the
Oh
kind
my
of things
God.
that annoy Wilk because he thinks they don't matter, but it just made a complete difference.
all right.
What's that? Why do you say that? When do I ever say things like that?
You're always like, it doesn't matter. Just go on.
Well, some things don't matter, like when you're talking about imaginary settings.
The period that was his worst was. Wilk, are you enjoying this?
Wilk, are you okay?
Are you gonna like have a stroke or something or what, man?
Oh no, are you done talking?
No. You waiting?
Okay.
Are
you
you
waiting?
okay, Wilk?
Are you?
Yeah, I'm just really fucking bored.
Are you bored?
What's wrong?
Go on.
I must
Go
be
on.
boring.
This is incredibly boring.
Oh,
Really?
it is?
Why?
All right.
We're talking about the author who wrote the book.
Yeah, no, you're doing a really shitty job.
You're doing
about it.
terrible,
But Go
right?
on.
Well, I
But
think
yeah,
that's
I mean,
what
it's hard.
Rick is kind of getting at.
Yeah.
Right, but I got it in 30 seconds.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Well,
and I
you kind
think-
of put it out as like nothing matters, and you just saying it in a couple sentences.
And that's not interesting
Yeah,
either.
you know what?
It's not very.
I don't have to be here. You guys can do this on your own if you want. I mean,
but
I understand with his
A lot of his
wives that in between
Yeah.
his wives he would
crash.
crash.
Yeah, like
he.
there was
shut
no-
the fuck up! Oh my god, I haven't talked like in 10 minutes.
Why not?
Why don't you start?
What's wrong?
I'm taking a break.
What's wrong?
Why doesn't Wilk just talk?
I don't know.
We need to pack it with some content because there is a lot about Philip K. Dick that needs to be covered.
Oh yeah, he's endlessly fascinating. I mean, there's
Yeah.
tons of videos
guys,
on
you have to
YouTube
stop.
or
You
on-
have to
I was
stop. You
listening
have to
to a
stop.
podcast
You have to
on
stop.
BBC
You have to stop.
where-
Ryan, you have to stop. This is gonna be my last podcast. I can't do this. You guys, let's have a conversation about this. You're just reciting shit.
I want you to talk.
I'm trying to talk. I'm trying to get it, but like Ryan's
You
like,
did? When did you
Ryan,
try to talk?
Shut the fuck up. God, doesn't have to be this terrible. We've already done an episode on Philip K. Dick. I'm glad you guys watched a 2-hour documentary, but people that are listening to the podcast, let's do something that will both inform and entertain here. I mean, you're literally just.
I thought
you're
this was what we were doing.
talk, ask questions, work on some banter or something. This is like
What do you mean?
so fucking boring. But let's actually do a show here. I mean,
What do you
I
mean?
don't want to hear another fucking anecdote about Philip K. Dick.
Well, he's the author we're discussing
He did
tonight.
drugs. He did acid. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about his work. Let's talk about stuff. But this is like just insane. I mean, you guys are going on and on and on.
Well, there's a lot
of
of to go on with him,
here.
and especially with Sanity.
There's a lot, yeah.
Well, then why does it be so fucking boring?
You think people will
Yes,
listen to it?
it is mind-numbingly dull. This is by
My
far
God.
the best part of the podcast right here that's been recorded because we're actually debating how dull the podcast is. People will listen to this part, and after we get back on track, they're going to turn it off. You can talk for 3 hours how paperclips are made. It doesn't make it interesting.
But we're
The
not talking
information-
about paperclips.
You might as
Yeah,
well
we're talking
be.
about a fascinating.
You're
character.
quantifying and giving information to people that nobody wants or needs. Okay,
But
There was absolutely nothing that I quantified. I mean, I said he
try
took
asking a question
2
to
acid
people.
trips.
I mean,
Okay,
like,
sorry about
you're just
that.
monologuing.
He took
Everyone
various acid trips.
I mean,
What do you want Rick to do? To ask you how many acid trips Philip K. Dick did?
No, but
Would you
like
a round
do
table?
something. Yeah. I mean,
Standing there.
probably a little quid pro quo.
Hold on, I'll be right back.
Can we go to bed at 11? But I mean, if we want to make a documentary, let's make a documentary. But let's like tie this stuff in together so it is entertaining and informative at the same time.
Oh, you want to do an entertaining show?
Well, why start now?
And entertainment is an elusive
Yeah, I don't think we should do
thing,
that.
especially when no one has really kind of gone through comedic writing and that kind of
Yeah,
exercise.
you need to go to Second City for us. Will.
I assumed you guys have.
Dude, I've taken like fucking math and engineering courses my entire life.
Well, you need to go to Second City for us. This is getting ridiculous.
Sure.